So Dewey Larson, the physicist, revealed that time is in fact a three-dimensional domain. And this is where we're getting into the idea of what's over there on the other side when you flip over a particle and it turns into a wave. There's a three-dimensional realm where time as we know it is spaced out. Now, okay, not everybody's following me on this, but we're going to go into how this works, so just stay with me. Einstein talked about the space-time fabric, and the basic idea about gravity is that planets are like dipping down in this fabric, and then gravity is just the result of things rolling towards the planet as the fabric is displaced. Well, think about it. If this were true, and all the planets are sitting on top of this fabric, that means that only the fabric and what's above it represents the realm that we live in. But then you got this whole place on the bottom. And where is that? And how do we get there? Well, the answer is you got to punch a hole through. So that's your wormhole, right? You know, the word wormhole comes from the idea of a worm burrowing through an apple. Everybody remember that? And it's like the outside of the apple is space-time. The inside of the apple, where the wormhole goes, is time-space. That's a three-dimensional realm of time. Time is not linear. It's only linear because we're stuck in space-time. So what happens is time-space is on the inside of the apple, or the donut in this case, and space-time is on the outside. But this whole system can invert so that space-time is now on the inside and time-space is on the outside. So here's the basics of it again. 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. You can move around in space, but you're fixed in time. It's moving forward like a river. When you go into time-space, what we would think of as time is now 3-dimensional, and what we would think of as space is now 1-dimensional. You actually move around in 3 dimensions of time. This is where we're having dreams. This is where we're having astral experiences. That's why a psychic in a particular place can actually look forward and backward in time in that location, because they're viewing through time-space. That's what your psychic function is. The distance you travel in time-space is actually time travel over here. Now that sounds really far out, but the bottom line is all the things that I'm telling you have been verified by multiple black ops witnesses. They've been verified by experimental secret projects, and a lot of actual evidence that's in the public domain that we just don't normally understand what it is or why it's there. The entry and exit points are very important. If you look up in these medieval texts about fairy circles and fairy rings, these are the little circles you go into where you find the fairies or the gnomes or the dwarves or the elves or whatever. Well, you don't just find them anywhere. You have to go into these circles, and you can only enter them at certain times, because it has to do with a planetary alignment. You see, the Earth has naturally occurring natural stargates on them. And I know that some of you might not believe this, but there is so much evidence, and we're going to go through some of that. There are natural stargates, and you actually can time travel. So there's a very important reason why the ancients were building things like Stonehenge and the pyramids. This is not just to entertain themselves and to build a tomb for the dead pharaoh. Okay, it's much more than that. So I read this book when I was 7 years old, and in the book we have descriptions of experiments in ESP between Harold Sherman, the author, and Sir Hubert Watkins, who was an Antarctic explorer. They documented some fantastic telepathy experiments. In one case, Sherman is sitting there in his room in LA, and he's tuning into Watkins, and he gets this pain in his head. And it hurts a lot. And so he writes down, okay, pain in the head. When we correspond that to what Watkins' journal said at the same time, all the people in his Antarctic expedition team were bumping into this stovepipe that had fallen down with a sharp edge, and they were actually lacerating their head, the skull. Bleeding from that. And he was feeling the pain. Just like I said, there's an energetic transmission of the pain. Well, after Watkins died, the telepathy continued because they were so much in affinity with each other that he could recognize Watkins when he spoke. So Watkins is describing in some of these readings, I guess you could call them, what it took for him to get into Sherman's mind. And he said there was a nested set of spheres that he had to go through. And he had to find a channel to the center to get to the message to Sherman, which was not easy. That's why they call it channeling. Because, and I didn't go into this last time, but what really appears to be happening here is everybody knows about the system of chakras, the esoteric system of chakras. The chakras are actually different levels of your soul and different levels of where your thought processes and consciousness processes are happening. So as you go through these Kundalini meditations, the idea is that you're supposed to raise the Kundalini serpent. I was shown in multiple readings that the actual process of raising that Kundalini is collapsing the chakras together into this set of nested spheres. Because when you do that, you focus everything into the one spot in your brain that we're going to go to here. So this is bringing all your chakras together and then finding that channel so that the entity that's trying to reach you or your higher self can get to the center, because the center is where all the action happens. Why is that? Well, the center of your brain has a small gland in it called the pineal gland, which, as you can see here, it was called pineal because it's shaped like a pine cone. This is the exact geometric center of your brain. It's right here. And this, as we're going to see, is very important in ancient cultures. The Sumerians gave it a description, which you can see here, the little acorns on the top of this staff that he had. And there's also a little jobber up here. And what we found out from Dan Burrish is that these can be reversed. The cylinder seals can be flipped over. And when you start doing that, you see some very interesting things, like the eye in the triangle and another eye in the triangle right here. So the Sumerians were hiding information. They were encrypting information in these seals. So this is the one we were just looking at. Here's your little pineal gland and the other one up there. Well, look at this. Now, if you've seen Stargate SG-1, the first episodes, you remember the Goa'uld, the villains in Stargate? You remember how they had these helmets that went around their head that looked like a snake? That's the helmet. That's the Anunnaki. They were human-like people, but they wore these weird helmets in order to appear like gods to the primitive Sumerians they came to. And this is how they encoded the secret of what they really looked like inside this image right here. It only works when you put a mirror image on it. But then you also see he's holding all these pineal gland staffs, and he's got this seal over his head, and more symbols here. But it gets a lot more direct as we go on. And you're going to start wondering to yourself, why in the world are all these cultures focusing on the pine cone? This is Osiris, the lord of the underworld in Egyptian mythology. This is his staff, which, as we now know, this is the raising Kundalini, the serpent, but it also represents DNA. And there on the top, as the Kundalini rises, what are they looking at? They're looking at the pine cone. That's the junction point where all this energy comes together. Now, King Tut has this Kundalini serpent actually going through his head. That's a symbol that they gave, that the pineal is fully activated, that your chakras have now all turned into that nested set of spheres, and that access from the higher realms is moving directly through your head. They believed he had that. Whether he did or not, we don't know.